Hello, everybody. Welcome to another awesome episode of Esoteric Atlanta. I have Cindy back again from Sacred Garden Yoga. You guys loved last time she was here, as do I. And I love these special guests that I have come on that are really going to be transformative in the way we walk into this new timeline or this new age of Aquarius that we're entering into, leaving the age of Pisces behind and transferring into a new age. And as you all know, as we transfer into a new age, the veil begins to lift and we start to rediscover who we really are. Sometimes that's fun. Sometimes that's not so fun. But it all comes down to your work. And so we're going to start off talking a little bit more about that. That's going to lead to another fun subject that kind of goes with being able to see more and to understand your own perceptions more. How are you today, Cindy?
I'm great. Thank you for having me here again. It's such a pleasure being with you and your peeps.
Yep, we're just a family on this channel. Well, we're going to start off because Cindy and I actually, as I've told you guys before, out of all the people I work with on YouTube, most of the people I work with on YouTube, I've never met in real life. I feel like I know them because we do so many Zooms together. But Cindy was my friend before YouTube even started. I teach at her awesome studio in Marietta. I shouldn't even call it a studio. It's a yoga school. It's literally what she's running is literally a yoga school, which is what it should be. And so she is the best person to kind of help people start to understand how to examine yourself as you move into this new age. And so one of the questions we got, Cindy, and I thought this was an awesome question. We talk a lot about the shadow work, and that's a big thing for people who are used to doing their own spiritual work, regardless of whether it's yoga or another discipline. The shadow work comes up a lot. And I think sometimes I forget that other people don't really, again, know what that is. We know what that is. So maybe we can first start by re-explaining what shadow work is. And then somebody asked, how does one start doing shadow work? What's the first step on that long journey?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, you know, the term shadow or shadow work was originally coined by Carl Jung, psychologist, back in the day, because he realized that a person's psyche was very much determined by aspects of themselves that they have pushed down or repressed or haven't looked at or rejected about themselves. And so he coined the term shadow work as a way of going into yourself and finding and reclaiming those pieces and parts that we pushed down. So, you know, his work is very much along the subconscious level. And we talk about, I'm sure most people have heard about like the conscious mind and the subconscious part of ourselves. The conscious mind is the part that we know that we're in the conscious mind. And a lot of times when we're asking for things to come into fruition or we're wanting to manifest, you know, we manifest very often from the conscious part of our mind, which is only the tip of the iceberg, where the subconscious is most of what we are, and it has a lot more magnetism than the conscious mind. Mm-hmm. So shadow work is a process of making the subconscious conscious. The subconscious, again, since it has more magnetism than the conscious mind, when we're working with our own awakening and then, you know, just our own manifesting and how we're wanting to show up in the world, how we want to share our gifts with the world, how we want to help this planet during this transitional period that we're going through, uniting our conscious and subconscious mind. In other words, it's what we would call uniting your will. Mm-hmm. So in other words, on your conscious mind, you might have like this deep, you know, you're saying, oh my gosh, you know, I want all this beautiful stuff to happen in my life. But if in your subconscious mind, you're self-sabotaging yourself, you're saying something like, well, you're not worth it, or no, you can't, you're afraid of your own power. That's actually a big, huge one for spiritual people and light workers. They're afraid of their own power. They're afraid of their own light. And so these are the fears that start to get pushed down. And then your will becomes divided, if that makes sense. So your conscious mind is saying, yes, I want all these beautiful things, but that's only this much part of you. But your subconscious mind, which is like this big, is saying, well, no, that's too scary. Don't go there. You have to come out of hiding you'll actually have to face yourself. You're going to have to do the work, and that's just too much. So let's not do it. Let's stay small, because smaller is more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the work is. So again, the shadow work is about pulling up all those beliefs and ideas, or last time we talked about trauma responses, pulling up any of those emotional responses that are still holding in your body, that's holding you small and holding you in fear, and they're bringing the light of your awareness on it, so you're not fighting yourself.
Right.
In other words, all of you, every single part of you is going toward your highest destination, instead of you being divided into pieces and parts.
And I will place, guys, if you missed the episode the previous episode we did with Cindy, I'm going to place that in the description box below. So if that's something you want to go back and rewatch, or even if you watched it that time and just need to go back to refresh your memory, I'm going to place that there as well, because it is almost like inside of you, you're playing this tug of war.
Yes.
And sometimes the subconscious is way more overpowering than the conscious. It's like the fat kid playing tug of war against the skinny kid. The weight is not even. And most people understand that idea of self-sabotage, where and the hard thing I find about shadow work, and this is why practices like yoga and other forms of spiritual practices are actual practices, is because sometimes we don't even know what that shadow is.
Sometimes, that's why it's subconscious.
Yeah, we're so out of touch with that. And I will say, at least from my experience in the however many years I've been doing my practice, people have this idea when you do a spiritual practice that it's all beautiful and light and you're just relaxed all the time. But most of the time, you're having to shine a flashlight on some really ugly parts of yourself. And that's hard. And to realize how much that you've been nasty to yourself.
Yeah.
Like where that comes from, and healing that part of yourself in order to then equalize it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's not a pleasant experience. These days, the whole shadow work thing is becoming more of a trend. I mean, that's not a bad thing, but I think sometimes folks don't realize that it's going to get ugly when you go into, and to prepare yourself for that. I mean, you can do it, you can handle it, but it's not like this I think like anything, like how yoga gets romanticized, like you were talking about, like yoga is this blissful thing where you're just going to be all happy and peace and blissed out and zenned out all the time. And it's actually the shadow part, when you're doing yoga, I think that's very much what it is, or any kind of spiritual practice. It is the process of making the subconscious conscious. Whenever that happens, it's going to get a little, a little gnarly, a little salty.
Yeah, no, it's like opening up Pandora's box sometimes. And I know we say this, like in the system of yoga that I practice and teach, you have a specific already pre-choreographed asanas which is a posture that everyone has to do, and they're pretty complicated and difficult. And so immediately you're forced to kind of pull. You see it in people, like you see it immediately, like the side of them that wants to run, where they would just run away from it. Actually, they have to stay, and it has to become evident. And they have to be presented with that. And so, and you see it as a teacher when people are all of a sudden like in that moment, you see the frustration and the anger, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the teacher or the practice itself. It's everything to do with what's coming out of you, and your duty and your job as the student is not to project that, then take it and throw it on someone else, but actually pull it out and look at it and try to start the process of almost healing it, which it's not a quick fix, guys. It doesn't happen overnight. It can be a long, long journey of trying to connect the two and do that shadow work to move forward. What are some of the gnarly experiences that you've had, Cindy, if you want to share of your own shadow work?
Oh my gosh. Well, you start to get probably one of the deeper ones when I had more of that dark night, like when you have a true dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
It was actually with my relationship with my husband. We were going through just a really challenging. I mean, we've been married for 20 years, at least that. So, it's normal,
Yeah.
I think when you're in a relationship for a long time, things are going to happen. And just an answer also to the question of the person who was asking, how do you begin shadow work? It can happen anywhere. It can be triggered by relationships. It can be triggered by just like you go any time you're going into this world with the idea that you want to awaken, it's going to pull you into the stuff that you don't want to look at yourself. And so it can be triggered by your work, it can be triggered by relationships, it can be triggered by not just your partner relationships, but children's relationships. It can be triggered by so many things. Yep. But anyways, at that point in my life, it was definitely triggered by the situation my husband and I were going through. And when it did, it pulled up so many issues inside of me that had to do with like just deep, deep senses of like betrayal and abandonment. That was even beyond what he and I were going through, you know? And then to have to look at how my relationship with him pulled up all the sense of betrayal and abandonment, from my real father. And then from not just from that I went through, but then from what like my mother went through and my grandmother, because there's a lot of repeating patterns that happen. And that, by the way, that's another thing when you're doing shadow work. Like, how do you know where to start with your shadow? Things that repeat in your family line. That's another good way to look at and see, well, what situations are repeating, not just with me, but it happened to my mom, or it happened to my grandfather, or it happened to my father, or it happened to, to someone in my family. So that's another good way to look at where your shadows are. So anyways, it brought up like every sense of feeling of all that. And I felt myself literally shattered. And that I was literally shattered. I could feel the shattering. And I remember I was here in my home and I was walking up the stairs, and I knew that I was like, okay, I'm going to walk up these stairs and I'm going to go into that bed in my bedroom. And I knew something was going to happen. It's like, I just knew it. And it was in that moment that everything did just kind of shatter inside. And it was when you're having like a dark night, how they say, do one day at a time. One day is too long. Yeah. It's just simply one breath. Just take one breath. Okay, if you can survive this one breath, you can survive the next breath. You can survive the next breath. Yeah. So very often the shadow, or it did for me, it will create a literal shattering, but it's also the shattering of the ego. It's a mini death. Shadow work becomes like this mini death experience where all of your hurts and pains from this lifetime and many lifetimes will come up and will show how it's entrenched in your body and in your DNA. Absolutely. And that experience, it stays with you for a little while, but then after a while you pick yourself up and you can breathe again. It's not so much one breath at a time. You can go back to one day at a time, and then you can go back to, living your life. I trust me. I absolutely. I've been there, and I liked what you said about like if your purpose, again, I know it sounds cliche, but it's truly, truly true. Especially as we go into this new age, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience, and we make agreements before we take our avatars. Yes. And if your agreement was to grow in your consciousness, then you best believe the universe is going to hold you to that agreement, and you're going to experience a lot of, as our friend Tamara from Australia was saying, you're going to, sometimes people that have the biggest spiritual work in this world have had had horrific lives in a way, because so many things were thrown at them for them to then pull it out of themselves and to grow in their consciousness, if that makes sense. You know? And so much of the shadow work is also about integrity. And what finding integrity within yourself, in other words, pulling yourself all back together again so that you can be whole. It's not so that you can just be pure love and light.
Right.
Because in your divinity, you are that already. But when you're having a combined divine and human experience, it's wholeness. And when you understand that part of your wholeness is your humanity, and then when you understand that humanity is going to come with all sorts of levels of experiences and emotions, and the dark experiences, and when you can begin to accept, like lean into it and accept that that's what you are, and here's another thing with the shadow work too that I think a lot of us don't like to look at. You know, it's easy it's not easy, but maybe it's a little easier when you see yourself as a victim. But then when you look at all the places within you when you were a perpetrator, you know, no one likes to look at how we've hurt other people or how maybe we have contributed, but that's also part of your human experience too. I mean, you're going to come in, you're going to be victimized, and you're going to be both.
Right. Absolutely.
And when you can see that, okay, this is part of my my evolution as a both spiritual and human being, to know every single spectrum of the light that you are. You're not just on the light side of the spectrum, you're also on the dark side of the spectrum. Right. You're gonna be all of it. Right. So we reject, you know, we push things into our subconscious, we'll reject the things. That's one of the things is any time where we've been the perpetrator or things are emotions like jealousy, for instance. We don't like admitting, like when we're jealous or when we're envious or when we are secretly wishing someone harm. We're not saying it out loud. Like out loud, we'll be like, oh, I'm wishing you the best. But inside, there's just something like going, I really hope that you fail. Like no one likes admitting to that kind of stuff. But everyone feels it in some point or another. You see what I mean? And that's part of the shadow work too, is acknowledging when all that comes up, instead of just pushing it down, saying, oh my God, that's such an evil thing to think. It's like, well, you know, it's a little dark, but
that's what humans do, and acknowledging that helps.
Evil things, but at least see that you have that emotion inside of you, like, you know, most people do.
Right. Well, I've been saying this a lot on my channels too, because we see this, you know, as most people, where there's like two timelines playing out right now, and it's becoming more and more and more obvious. And on one side of this board, of this chess game that's happening as we transition into the timeline, is the word trigger has become a big trigger word. And so people are now, one thing that drives me crazy is that, you know, people have to have so many disclaimers because we don't want to trigger people. And if you're triggered, then it's somebody else's fault for triggering you. You guys, your triggers are your roadmap to your own understanding of the shadow work. Like when you're triggered, first of all, it's nobody else's responsibility of what you're feeling inside of yourself. That's something to show you. It's like a highlighter. It's like a highlighter highlighting something that isn't really, you're feeling that emotion. And sometimes I say this to my students a lot, especially in the beginner courses I teach. When we look at these repetitive thoughts or this shadow work, sometimes it is just an emotion you feel. Like there might not even be a story you remember attached to it. It's like an emotion that comes up around a certain topic that you try to then suppress, and that needs to be examined. So well, let me ask you this too. So if we have people that are new on this spiritual journey that don't feel like they have a support system at their house, or want like someone to kind of help guide them into this work, would you be, as a healer, someone available to like help somebody over Zoom, like counsel them through this? Is that something?
Yeah, I mean, I feel is one of my greater gifts is actually because, you know, I had to go through all those different, that was only one experience that I went through, you know, with my husband, and to do the work as helping people through their own shadowy stuff. Yeah, I mean, I had to do the work myself.
Right. Right.
And I think that was also, it's one of my more specialties, I guess you can say.
No, it is.
I can go through the body and find those places that have been fragmented or disassociated, or the things that we pushed down, or the things that we've chosen to forget. I usually have the help of my spirit guides as well. I mean, I was also in a way initiated, and I can't say I was really initiated by a particular human. I mean, there might have been one person that helped me, where the connection with the sacred darker mothers like Kali, and even Lilith, and all these other shadowy sacred mother goddess beings, they very often come in, and they're able to, because if you work with Kali, she doesn't. I mean,
Kali, yes,
she comes in when you've been giving the hint. In other words, the God has been telling you for a while, do this, kind of gently, but you've chosen to ignore it. But then Kali will come in.
She smacks down the hammer.
Especially if you're still praying, like you're praying for awakening, but there's a stubborn streak inside of you, like most of us, and you're not going or turning toward the direction that you should be. She'll come in and will tear things apart for you. But for the sake of your own awakening. And so when we say that you're having a Kali experience, that means you're having an experience of disruption in your life, when things are like that time with my relationship with my husband. That was a full-on Kali experience, where you just, your life totally becomes disrupted because you need a disruption, because for some reason you're not getting it. And so
I like how you said that, because there's like subtle, there's subtle, like when you're, you always, be careful what you wish for. And like, even in the Bible, it says, ask and you shall receive, knock and the door shall be opened unto you, seek and ye shall find. When you're praying for this spiritual awakening, and God, the universe, is giving you like a kiddie pool, like kind of, but you ignore it, he's going to send something then that you can't ignore. And someone, an energy like Kali, it's not something you can just ignore it. It's very much so. So so for people who are wanting to awaken, and you're trying for it and you still haven't, just wait. that might come. But that's one thing I actually really appreciate about like the Hindu faith. I know like in the Ramayana, this is a big aspect of like, us coming from the Western world, we're so inundated with the church, which is actually, and Cindy and I have talked about this off camera a lot, and you guys know, because we are going through the missing books of the Bible. The original Christian faith was a very mystical faith. It was an extremely mystical faith that actually was very, very similar to what you see in like Hinduism and all these other Eastern faiths. They, especially like with the Ramayana, you see these concepts of like demons or these dark forces, and you battle them in these stories, but they're also there to feed you information. Right. There's also a learning experience from this as well. And I love that, because when you do spiritual work, you can't understand the light until you've walked through the darkness in a lot of ways.
Even like talking about those kind of sacred texts, even if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, when Shiva shows himself, I think it's either the 11th or 13th chapter, and he shows himself to Arjuna, and he's like a demon. It's frightening, like fire coming out and putrid and just all this stuff. And Arjuna is like begging him to return back. Please, come back. Please show me the other way. And it's funny at that point, that Arjuna realized, oh my God, he's like, he means it. This is the real deal. And that this idea of Shiva or God, it's pretty full spectrum, It's not just this one aspect, especially when we come into our human form, that that's why we came into human form, is to know and to understand and to make peace with things like death. And that was the big thing within the Bhagavad Gita with Arjuna, is this concept of death
and mortality. And that's a big thing.
Our mortality.
And that's what a lot of yoga students, especially in the Ashtanga world, that actually is a huge trigger, because all of a sudden we all know that we're going to pass away. We all know that in our minds, we know that we're not forever. But when you start to do this work, and again, it doesn't happen overnight. It's like this slow pulling back when you really start to realize your mortality. Like you really start to get it, and you really start to understand the human you are is not going to be around forever. And what is that? And that is that kind of causes a bit of an ego death and kind of gives you a dark night of the soul, where people start to kind of then dive into the shadow of themselves. Richard Freeman, who is a pretty famous senior Ashtanga teacher, and he used to say that really we're preparing for death is what we're doing when we're taking on a spiritual practice. In a lot of ways, we're just preparing for that so that we can enter into that realm that we don't want to discuss as human beings, because that itself can be shadow, that itself can be a taboo, and that's what I laugh when you talked about Arjuna, because if y'all haven't read the Bhagavad Gita, throughout the whole book, he's like begging to see the full extent. And when he finally gets what he wants, he's like, no, it's fine. No, it's okay. Let's go back. And one thing I love about Arjuna, like in this story too, speaking of the shadow work and like the misconceptions we have on this in spirituality when we're coming from the West, the whole Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna, if y'all don't know the story, he's standing on the battlefield and he's facing off between people that he's loved in his life, family members, teachers, and he has to go to war for this like piece of land, basically. And I think it's Krishna is the avatar, is like talking to him and like coaxing and basically like, it's like a come to Jesus moment, but it's, it's a different avatar. And Arjuna's kind of looking for some like get out of jail free card. He doesn't want to do this.
Like, don't make me do this. Yes.
Yeah. And Krishna's like, dude, you're a warrior. You got to do it. Like there's no, you got to do this. And it's kind of this realization that we have to do that. Like we can't just be happy all the time. We can't just be in this blissed out state where we ignore our path and our dharma. And that was eye-opening for me in that story, where he was like, dude, you have to do this. Like you're a warrior. That's your dharma. You have to go and fight. You have to go and cause death to people, basically. And what a hard pill to swallow that is. But that is such a metaphor for like what we go through when we're also we have to do this. We have to face Kali. We have to face this is crude, but I tell students sometimes when they're first in our beginner courses down at AYA, I always try to like give them the raw truth before we get started to make sure if they don't want to do it, they can leave. But I'm like, this practice is going to show you where you're an asshole sometimes. Like it's not going to be flattering. There's going to be times when you don't like who you are, you don't like what you're seeing, but then you work through that. And that is where, it's just a constant. I don't think there's ever a time where you've exercised every shadow out of you. I think it's a constant re-examining of stuff like that. So speaking of, again, before we get into the next topic that kind of has to do with this, if you guys want help, if you want somebody to kind of teach you and guide you through this, I am going to put, again, Cindy's links down in the description box below. As I said, I've known Cindy for a long time before YouTube ever happened, and I will tell you, she's the real deal. She's helped me a lot. So she is awesome. So she's an awesome person to get in contact with, and she can help you if that's something that you want a teacher. Sometimes it is great to have a teacher because you have that accountability. You have someone that's not emotionally involved in your life. It's kind of like a therapist who isn't emotionally involved in your life, and they can kind of see through, when you're kind of lying to yourself or trying to dissuade yourself, they can kind of see through that and therefore help you stay in the correct path. So again, her contact information will be down in the description box below if that's something you're interested in. So now this is something I'm super excited about talking about. And y'all, there should be a fly in the wall. So I teach at Cindy's yoga school on Sunday mornings. And after the students leave, usually Cindy and I sit around and have probably the strangest conversations to normal people that are at the coffee shop down the street. They probably think we were wackadoo if they heard, because we talk about the weirdest stuff ever. And we talk about it with sincerity. So I'm super excited to bring this up with you guys, because I think all of you guys on this channel could totally hang with us and have these conversations. But the subject of Ouija board came back up because I had talked to Cody from Mystery Archives about that. And we started kind of talking about when you do start, because we talked about the clairvoyance, the different clairs of seeing, of things that aren't readily available to us. And as the veil lifts, we start to recognize that there are different types of dimensions, we should say, with entities. And I'm going to let you take it from here, Cindy, because you had some great insight into that.
Well, yeah, I mean, just doing the work that I've done with people, with the shadow and the retrieval and looking at what's holding into people's energy patterns, you have to realize, especially that when you start, to awaken and you maybe get very excited about the things that you see and all that stuff, that everything that you see is not going to be for your highest and best. That there are very many four-dimensional beings that are out there, and that they'll pretend. There are fourth dimensional beings that will pretend to be the light, and will try to trick you. You're talking about the trickster entities that are out there, and they'll come in and they'll trick you, and they can even show a light, but the light looks different than the highest. Like the highest vibration of light is very dimensional, like multi-dimensional. Whereas someone who's pretending to be the light, their light is going to be flatter. It's
right.
More like not as fully dimensional, it's like more one-dimensional almost. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyways, there are these entities that are out there that can mess with you, and that will that will not have necessarily a very good influence over you, and to be aware of that. Especially as a clairvoyant being, or as a light worker, or someone who's getting in touch with elements that are unseen with our regular five senses. That what you come in contact with isn't always going to be good, and to recognize that, one, that is a possibility, and two, why it's also so important to do your work. Including the shadowy work that we're talking about. Because the more you do your work, that's going to be the biggest protection against such beings.
Right.
I mean, there are things where you can, like if you're feeling weak, that you can, surround yourself with light. But this is my opinion. My opinion is just do your work so that your energy is, we were talking about electrons and chakra systems and the anatomy of your higher spirit. Doing the work so that just fully blossoms, and then you can't be
fooled,
manipulated, or tricked. Especially if you go in and you're feeling hurt, or you're desperate for answers. That's when these beings can come in and sucker you into believing that you're getting into something good when it's not so good. So in other words, that's not just human beings that do that. There are entity beings that do that as well.
Yeah.
And you always hear, well, don't play with Ouija boards. That's why, because unless you're specifically working and you're calling in the highest vibration of light, and you know what that is and what that feels like, anything can begin to start to come through. So,
well, that's part of doing the spiritual work, is being able to tap into your own discernment. Yeah. And sometimes discernment is real. I mean, I think we all think we have discernment, but even in my experience, discernment gets greater the more you know yourself and the more you're able to work through yourself. And I love that. Yeah. Cause a lot of people will play with Ouija boards who don't really have that much of a spiritual background. And so they will bring in an entity that's not there to help them, but they're kind of tricked by it a little bit. Whereas I know we talked about this with tarot cards too, because that's something that people are starting to realize, that these divination tools, they're just tools. Like, that's what I say when people ask me about the tarot cards. They're just, all that is a tool. The divinator is the person that's being able to read. And Cindy and I talked about this on Sunday, and one of my favorite people in the world on YouTube is Tarot by Janine. I just love her, and she's so good at what she does, because it's hard to read those cards, isn't it?
Oh, yes. That is not easy work. So yes, it's amazing the people that have cultivated that as their skill set.
And you see, and people get so afraid of, especially people coming from a more traditional or conservative Christian background, they get afraid to use these tools of divination, but the tools themselves are not what's hurting you. It's your own ability to divinate and to have discernment and to tap into yourself and to know yourself in a lot of ways. And you know, tarot cards can't, all tarot cards really do is give you a foreshadowing overcast. That's basically it, so that you can make better decisions or kind of figure out. I know sometimes in tarot cards, it'll give you like 2 different paths that can happen, and it's up to you and how you work as to which one's going to come into fruition. And it's not something, I mean, it's not something to be afraid of, is it, Cindy, some of these tools of divination?
No, as long as you're, you know, you're going in there, and whenever I'm doing any kind of work like that, it's to create sacred space for yourself. You know, like really make sure that you're calling in, or you're listening to forces that have your highest and best interest in mind. And you can, you know, just ask a lot of times if you feel something coming through. The higher beings of light will only come through with pure unconditional love. And you can even ask that, are you here with unconditional love for me? And they, you know, and if they're not, because you can have beings that are not like demons, but they're kind of halfway.
Yeah.
They have their own, they have their own agenda.
Yeah.
And I think it's even in the because there are these belief systems, and it's in the Gnosticism when you go in and you start to read about Sophia, the goddess Sophia.
Yep. Yeah, we've talked about her in the chat.
Had like a descent, and in her descent, this fake god was created. Yeah. They call it the demiurge. The demiurge. Yeah, IERGE. I don't ever know how to say it.
Yeah,
and Aleister Crowley even talks about it, I think, within his teachings as well. But it's the demiurge. They're the fake gods.
Yeah, and
so there is like this fake god. Mm-hmm. And he has, you know, he has his forces, but then we confuse all that with the higher being of light and being aware of when the fake god and his archons, I guess you could say, come in.
Yeah.
Try to, you know, manipulate and control us, but they're very talented. Mm-hmm.
That's the like we've been doing all this other stuff as humans. That's basically what they've been doing for a long time. And we actually, guys, I'm going to tag down below. We did the Apocryphon of John, which was a banned heretical book from the Bible, LOL, that talks about Sophia, and the main one that she kind of has is Yeldabaoth, and it talks all about that. So I will put that down. That does come from the original Gnostic Christian faith. So I will put that down below. And I loved how you say you can ask if the entity or the group, the gang, is there for pure love. It's kind of like with police officers when they're doing like a drug bust. I mean, I've only seen this in the movies. I'm just going to clarify that right now. But where if someone asks them if they're a police officer, they have to say they are. If they, you know, like if they're trying to, so there has to be.
You have to say that they are or not.
Yeah, there has to be a level of disclosure when it comes to that. Mm-hmm. And something that Cindy has helped me with a lot too, and actually a lot of spiritual leaders that I look up to, like Cindy, that have helped me with. Everything in the universe basically goes off of one law, and that's the law really of free will. And so when you feel an entity trying to come in and manipulate you into doing its bidding or to using your energy source or whatever it is they're doing, if you feel that, you don't really have to fight it. All you have to say really is like, I don't consent. Yeah. You gotta go away. And they will. Because they
have to, unless you made like a contract with them at some point or another. Because in some of the work I've done too, people will have like little implants on them.
Yeah,
implants from other dimensional beings. Mm-hmm. Where it's, you know, sometimes the implants are simply informational based. They're wanting to get information from you. Mm-hmm. And so they use these implants. Sometimes those implants are to take away your light so that you won't be as willing to do the work that you want to do. You know, in other words, it might cause like just bad feelings inside of you. So it makes it harder for you to do your work, your gift.
Right.
As a spiritual person or as a light worker to help, that there are specific things that happen for those light workers or spiritual beings. Like there is forces out there that will target those beings specifically. And yeah, you can get implanted.
Yeah.
With things, like you'll have little implants of stuff and having to remove some of those
Yeah.
as well.
I had an experience once where, and I've off and on have had back issues, but now I've learned, my back's gotten so much better, but now I've learned, like, when I feel a little achy when I get up, I've kind of learned where it's, and this is, if this is somebody's first time on my channel, you're probably like, what the hell are they talking about? But now I've kind of learned when it's an actual physical issue, maybe I'm about to get my cycle or something like that. And when it's not an actual physical issue having to do with me, if somebody's messed with something. And I usually say, I'll say it in my head too, like, whatever you put in me, you got to take it out now. And there was one point where and it might've been after a conversation we had, Cindy, months ago, where I said, whatever was consented to before this with you, I withdraw. I don't consent anymore. And everything went away.
Yeah. You know, or whatever. You totally have the power to do that. So, you know, sometimes what I'll do at the end of my yoga classes, when I remember, is we'll say, you know, or I'll have them just repeat it in their head, anything that doesn't belong to me, I release it now, I delete it. I delete it and uncreate it through all space, time, dimensions, and reality. Because you can pick up not just stuff that's out there, but collective emotions and feelings.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that you can do very easily as well. If you feel like you've picked up on stuff, you know, I delete, release, and uncreate through all space, time, dimensions, and reality. Anything that's not for my highest good or anything that doesn't belong to me. Yeah. And just letting the earth take it. Just give it to Pachamama, Mother Earth.
Yeah. You know, the funny thing is too, and I want to say this before I forget, guys, even when you say, like, I'm done, I don't consent, take it away, it will try to come back again. It's always going to try to come back to renegotiate. So this is something you'll constantly be saying, I don't consent, I don't consent. But there was one time I did a ceremony with one of my other friends who's very, I know I've talked to you about her before, Cindy. She does Reiki too, and she's very spiritual. And we did a lot with, like, ancestral work. And when my 5 times great grandmother, who was, I've talked about, she was Queen Victoria, there was an agreement that had been made. And when they were doing the ceremony to break the agreement, I kid you not, it was the wildest experience. And I've had a lot of paranormal experiences. It got so hot and actually we're in this room we were in, and you could just feel just the aggression coming from that entity, whether that was Victoria or whatever entity she was serving, but it severed. And that night I slept harder than I have ever slept in my life. It was like my body just completely gave in to being healed and being, like, restored. And I know that for people who are new to this, I know this sounds like crazy, but I mean, y'all, this stuff's real. Like, it's real. And these beings that live on the other side of the veil or in the different dimensions, they're just as real as we are. Right. And we were saying that on Sunday, part of awakening is you start to have these experiences because you all of a sudden start to be able to see what you couldn't see before. Mm-hmm. And it is hard for people who are new to this, or especially if you come from, like, a super conservative family where this stuff wasn't talked about. You can fall for the wrong thing. You can be a real freaked out. You don't know that you have your own power. And I think, it's funny. I laugh when we go through the missing books of the Bible. We talk about all the angel and the angelic beings, and whenever they appear to people in their full form, because I do believe, like, those beings can take human form too for if they need it necessary. The first thing they always say is, like, don't be afraid. Like, whoa, don't freak out. It's all good. I don't want to scare you. But darker entities aren't really going to care as much about, again, it's that pure and unconditional love that you have, that they have for you. Yeah. You know, and so it is just learning that discernment. And I do think that coming into this new age, more and more people are going to start to learn how to use divination techniques and learn how to have that divine relationship with the spirit world and with.
Well, it's powerful. Mm-hmm. And I think when you start to get into it, you need to realize what you're actually getting into.
Yeah.
times we think, oh, this is just kind of fun, and I'm just going to have a good time, and I'm just going to play, and I'm going to do whatever. And you don't realize what you actually, I mean, it's kind of like the movies that they make.
Yeah.
They're out playing, and then suddenly they awaken some kind of force that they weren't supposed to. I mean, that does happen on a certain level.
Right, right. Well, I was laughing because I was telling Cindy about Janine. Obviously, you guys know, but Janine comes to this channel all the time, and she's such a strong reader of tarot cards, and she just reads so quickly, and she's so spot on. Like if you guys go back to her channel, watch her old videos, everything she said has come into fruition. But Cindy and I were talking about like she's able to withdraw her own opinion and her own ego from what the cards are saying. And that's something people struggle with, right? When they're doing divination techniques or something, that ego gets involved, where they want the cards to say something, and so they force that narrative to say something that isn't what the cards are trying to say. And I think that also comes with working on your own stuff a lot, to be able to back your own opinion away from it and just see what the cards say.
You have to be, at some point, just make the decision that you're going to be radically honest with yourself all the time. I mean, because things will come in, yes, like what you're talking about. Well, am I pushing the cards? And you being able to say, being really honest and say, oh, yes, I am, or yeah, because that's the way our ego will come into play when we're doing, any of this work. Is it likes to be right.
Right. Yeah.
It wants to be right, and it wants to be like acknowledged as being right all the time. So then when something comes in and says, no, you're wrong, then we're like, no, that can't be.
Yeah, I know.
So that takes that honesty with yourself.
And I laugh because that's so common just in the spiritual world in general. Like it's so like I'm sure we're like a reality show for the aliens at this point. I think we're like, welcome to season 12 of Earth. Like we're because human beings are the funniest creatures. Like I see it in our studio here at AYA all the time. I'm sure you've seen it at Sacred Garden. It's just human behavior where people come to you because they want to change, they want help. But then when they're presented with change by the shadow work, saying this is where you're wrong, this is where something needs to be worked on, they go, oh no, I'm good.
Yeah, you're like, no, wait a minute, that's not what I wanted to do.
Right, exactly.
The answer that I want. That's what I mean when we say that shadow work. It's going to make you go do the things that you don't want to do. It's going to face like your deepest fears. Mm-hmm. And that's a good another good point too, to the person who asks, where do I begin with shadow work? Look at where you're resisting.
Yeah.
In other words, you get a hint. All right, this is what's coming up for you, and then you go, no. That is pretty much there's something there, and then that would be a good time just to get really honest and say, okay, what am I afraid of?
Right.
What is the worst thing that's going to happen here if I look at this, and how much of that is a story that's been made up by my programs and my ego and my social conditioning.
Right.
Because social conditionings and those constructs that we create for ourselves, or those masks that we put on, they do a really, really good job to protect you from those deepest fears and the things that we want to reject. Yeah, I mean, I've looked all in the scriptures. You go look in the Yoga Sutras, you go look in the Bhagavad Gita, and nowhere in any scripture have I ever read that said, where you have to, there's no change.
Right.
There's no, you can't, that you can do this work without changing your behavior.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
It's not written anywhere.
No.
You actually have to.
I know, and I really want to. So I'm going to say that what Cindy said again. So if you're interested in taking on a spiritual path, I would suggest getting these books, these old, either the Bhagavad Gita, whatever it is. There's tons of them. You can even email me or Cindy and we'll give you a list. Read them. Nowhere in those books do they say, this is going to be super easy peasy. Yeah.
That. And it doesn't say like, you don't have to, yeah.
They all say, this is going to suck. And I'm paraphrasing in modern language. They don't say it that way, but they're like, this is going to be tough. And you're going to have to, I mean, Todd says it a lot. My boyfriend, like, it's about creating new patterns too. Like you're having to break old patterns to create new ones. And that is hard. And that is difficult.
And that and that it's a path of most resistance, not least resistance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's where people get where they westernize some of the ideas and the philosophies where, you know, it's all love and light and it should all be like easy and good. I mean, you know, maybe some aspects, but when it gets down to some nitty gritty work, it's the path of most resistance. It's not the path of least resistance.
The devil is literally in the details. Like literally the devil is in the details. And I know I say that in our class on Sundays a lot. I'm always like, get uncomfortable. This is not about comfort. This is about, because when you're uncomfortable, like in the lineage that I come from with Ashtanga, it's a challenging practice that pushes people to this physical level of discomfort. Not we don't push students over their ability at the moment. We're not going to come in and like break your legs. Like that's not going to happen. To the point, there are baby steps, but you see it because we teach Mysore, which is where students come in and they do their assigned practice, and the teacher walks around the room and helps them. And it's interesting because you can literally see when you observe a Mysore room where people get resistance, because if you're talking about the practice of yoga, a lot of times these postures that we do are done in a way to trigger certain responses that are held in certain, like as we talked about last time with the chakras, so certain different energy places in the body that are held and they trigger them. And you literally see some students in the Mysore, you don't see it as much in a lead classes, they get to this one posture and they'll do everything to postpone doing it. They'll go to the bathroom. They'll decide all of a sudden they need to fix their hair, even though they're a mess. They'll start picking their nails. And it's literally 5 breaths in and that's it. It's hit it and quit it. It's like what? 5 breaths is what? 10 seconds?
Yes.
15 seconds? It's not, but you see that mental like gymnastics that people do to try to get out of being in that place of discomfort. And even though it's physically happening in yoga, it's not really physical. It's all connected to something in the psyche or something in the thought process that has created a limitation, whether that's coming from a heretical line, your lineage you've inherited. It's like, I mean, it always cracks me up the way Western peoples, portray our movies. You see portrayed yoga, and I'm like, that's not what we do.
I know.
You hear the
F bomb. Scare y'all to death, but
I know, right? Welcome to our cult.
There's a lot of good and beautiful and happy things that come from it as well. But like, if you really want to make more of a longer lasting shift in your life, this is what it will require, instead of only having short moments of pleasure based off of pleasure that comes purely from the ego, and wanting to actually experience, deep meaning and purpose and love. Mm-hmm. That's what we're talking about. And to get to that point, you just have to be very real and honest, and just being willing to look at yourself, but not seeing yourself as like this evil or bad person. It's just who you are, and your full spectrum of light.
Human,
To meet whatever you come across with, we talked about this last time, with compassion and with acceptance and with love, so that your body feels, so you're all those parts of you feel safe to come back into your body once again, and you can like really fully integrate and be whole,
be grounded.
It's wholeness, I think, where you're going to find that peace and a happiness or contentment that lasts. And another thing too is releasing any idea that as you start to walk and be on this path, that you're never going to have any problems ever again, because that's false too.
No, you'll have tons of problems.
Things are still going to happen in your life, but the way you respond to them will
absolutely.
That's the main thing. It's not like bad things are going to quit happening. That's not true, because I think sometimes we think we're failing because we're not manifesting and things aren't coming out just the way I want them. And that's not the way it works either.
No. And I know, and that's one thing that I loved about Ram Dass, the way he would teach about exploring yourself. And when you see those ugly sides of yourself, that shadow side, and it makes you cringe and you don't want to look at it, that's because you're looking at it with your ego, right? Ego does it. But if you're able to kind of just observe it for what it is, and Ram Dass would talk about this a lot, and a lot of the yoga practice is literally just observing. A lot of working on is being able to feel the feelings of the emotion understand the emotion, but also be in a place of observing the emotion too, so that you can control how your ego then responds to the situation at hand. And Ram Dass would say, I'm paraphrasing, but he would say, like, when things happen, like if you're, meditating or doing your yoga practice or just doing simple like work with Cindy and something kind of gnarly comes up, instead of like trying to push it away or attach to it, just go, oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. That came up. Let's look at this now. And so you're able to practice what we call in the Yoga Sutras that Purusha, or that watcher, the seer, that part of you that's just observing, that's just seeing everything. And in my own life, because you're right. The closer, the more you feel like you're doing your work, actually, sometimes life gets even harder. Because when you're able to, I feel like if you're in a crazy world and you're able to kind of remain grounded and calm, it triggers other people, right? It triggers them in their own work, where we're all just kind of helping each other out here, but other people. So it can cause more problems, but you're able to handle yourself better, and you're able to see things clearer. That it's just one of my favorite mantras is this too shall pass. It's just a fleeting moment, a fleeting thought, a subconscious gross luggage suitcase you've been carrying around, and you can now unpack it, observe it, ugliness, work through it, and then
and that's mainly the work. Mm-hmm. It's not about and yes, I mean, once you do that, and your perception will slowly, it's like I said, it's not usually like, I mean, sometimes it's a quick process, but sometimes it's a slower process. You'll feel your perception begin to shift, and you'll start to make different decisions, and that's how your life changes too. Because and it's in the sutras, it's in the Patanjali writes about it in the Yoga Sutras, that if you are living life through the lens of like your traumas, or what you would call your kleshas, obstacles. In other words, if you're living your life through your obstacles, the result, what you're going to get back is going to be that same vibration. You're going to get back that same vibration of obstacle, and it's going to be happening that way.
Yep.
But then as you start to remove the obstacles or the kleshas, and you start to see more clearly, you're going to take action from that place of clarity, and it's going to provide a different energetic result from you.
Absolutely,
you actually begin to energetically align with a different frequency and vibration that has more to do with, your higher self, your soul, the truth, versus your pain.
Yeah. And I love, because that goes into what we talked about last time, about how, like, when you have a trauma response, a lot of times trauma, like when you see people who get in the same bad relationship over and over and over again, it's because something hasn't been healed with them. It's even though it's a bad situation with their partners that they're going through, but it's more like they're putting that out because they haven't taken it out and observed it and worked on it. It's almost like when you can see when your friend is making these same patterns over and over again, you can see it clearly. Well, you have to be able to have that sight for yourself as well. And I love that. And maybe next time we can actually talk about all the different kleshas for the group, so that they can, there's tons of them. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of different, it's like you're a track runner and you got these little hurdles you got to jump over in life. I know I've been seeing memes around how people are like horror face, like, why did I agree to do this? Like looking at their contract they made with God about taking in life, and it's like, why did I agree to do this? But it is a constant thing, and that's one thing I think a lot of people, especially when they get 4 or 5 years into a practice, whichever practice it is, and they start to kind of almost feel like it's never going to end, and they kind of want to see this finish line, but you're always working on it. As long as you're alive, you're always going to have that ego coming up. So it's constantly a practice. It's constantly, and it's so much easier. It's funny. Patabi Joyce, who was my boyfriend's guru, who passed away in 2009, he used to have this funny saying where he would say 99% practice, 1% theory. In theory, we talk about this stuff and it all makes sense. But then when you go to practice it, that's when it's real. And that's when it really, it's like, oh my God, this is so much harder in practice than it is in theory. And there was a funny story somebody told me once, that before the Westerners came over to India in like the 60s and started working with him, he would say like 70% practice, 30% theory. But then when the Westerners got there, this was in the 60s, guys, they just wanted to smoke a doobie and talk philosophy all day, that Guruji was like, okay, no, 99% practice, 1% theory. So you can't talk about this all day.
Talk about it all you want to.
But it's not going to change unless you practice it.
But until you make it happen and actually apply it into your life, it's not going to make all the difference.
So and I know I said this last time, because I think Reiki also is a good way to kind of help people kind of pull things out energetically. And you can do that from afar, right? I know we talked about this last time.
Yeah, I mean, it's all the same thing, because I'm a Reiki practitioner, like a Reiki master, but I'm also have shamanic roots. And so the work that I do, it's a combination. And I don't know if you knew that, but I'm also, it's funny, the very first thing that I ever received, which is kind of crazy because it's backwards. I mean, I had started the yoga practice, but I became a certified hypnotherapist when I was like in my 20s. And so after that, my teacher who taught me also how to do spirit release work. And I learned how to do, in other words, how to remove entities from people. So
you're an exorcist.
I learned how to do that before I learned how to do, which is kind of like bass backwards.
Yeah, I know, but you know what?
It's like, that's how I know. It's like I was entrenched in it from the very beginning, that the work, sometimes it's going to I was going to have to get my hands dirty.
Yeah. You're a little, exorcist.
All that to say, it's a little bit of a combination of all those things from all the work that I've done. And you're talking about like shadow stuff, another shadow experience I had. And just to explain that, I think, some of these gifts are truly inherited.
Yeah.
We were talking about this on Sunday. I had that one experience with ayahuasca, and I did it up in the mountains of Peru. I'm from Peru, and I've led several retreats to Peru, and this was probably like my 5th or 6th retreat, and I was co-hosting it with somebody. And this was actually kind of right after what I was talking about, like the shadow that I went through with my relationship. Mm-hmm. This was on around that time, like a little bit after that. And I had this strong urge to, like, there was this pulling. It's like the plant was calling me. Ayahuasca was like, okay, you need to come and do this. And you have to know, like, I don't do psychedelic. Like, I've never even smoked pot before in my life.
Oh, wow.
I'm just not, like, that's not usually what I, do. So when I got this calling, I literally got this calling. It says, next time when you go to Peru to do your retreat, you're going to go and you're going to do ayahuasca. And I'm like, okay, well, how's that going to happen? Because I'm like hosting the retreat. But I happened to be co-hosting it. And the day that they all went to Machu Picchu, because I've been to Machu Picchu about 6 or 7 times. That was the day that I was going to do my ceremony. And it wasn't like planned out or anything. I just knew that was going to be the day, and I had called the person where at the retreat center where we usually stay, and I asked her, if it was possible to like do ceremony on that day, and she says, yeah. But then when I got there, I had to find someone who would do the ceremony for me, because it's not like it was just someone was already having it.
Right.
I happened to. I was talking to someone who was staying at who works at the retreat center. She's like, oh, well, there's this female shaman over here, and she might be available to do it. And so, in other words, it all came together like at the very last minute.
Yeah.
And I went over there I met with her during the day, and then I went over there that evening. And, you always do the ayahuasca. From my understanding, I've only done it once in the nighttime.
Always at night, yeah.
In the dark. And I was the only one. Usually, if you do ayahuasca ceremony, you're in a group of people. It was just me. It was me and the shaman and her husband, who's playing some crazy ass drum music that, I guess it would just get you more into that state. So anyways, as I began the ceremony, that was a pure shadow for me. I've told you that, like, it was a pure trip down to hell and damnation and back. There was no, like, light. Some people experience, like, oh, I connected with God, and I had, like, this blissful thing. For me, it was just pure, pure
torture.
Hell. Yeah. I just went to pure torture for about 6 hours, but I could hear her coming, like her voice saying, "This is what you're doing to yourself. The reason they're keeping you is because I want you to see what you're doing to yourself."
That's powerful.
And but at the beginning, there was because ayahuasca is a purging. I did like have a purging at the very beginning. And I remember when I had this purging, there was like this kind of weird screeching in my head, and it was almost like this kind of like entity screeching being. And after we were through with the ceremony, she says, yes, what that was is you were holding the karma of what your ancestors used to do. In other words, you had great grandmothers or something like that who practiced the dark arts, and you held the karma for that. And I don't know how long ago that was, and I don't know what grandmothers they were or whatever. But I know, but it was something that was it felt like very real. So all that to say too that I mean I have I think within me like a lineage of I mean I don't do any like dark arts or anything like that, but a tinge to go into the shadow a little bit easier. Let's put it that way. The highest good. And I think that's what's important to recognize is that when you're doing this kind of work too, and even when you're doing this kind of work with yourself, is to serve the highest good and to serve your highest good. But anyway, it's kind of like all that stuff comes through when I'm working with somebody.
Cindy's worked on me before, guys, and it's a truly powerful, powerful experience. If you live close to the area, it's worth contacting Cindy for an in-house treatment because it's pretty magical to work with Cindy because she definitely has that like old world almost. And I say old world lovingly because every culture, not all of our ancestors knew this.
Well, everyone has an indigenous lineage. You have to.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And they all knew this. And then it got taken from us and got labeled as witchcraft or whatever they wanted to label it as. And now as we kind of turn back around into a new age, we're discovering that this is a part of our, what I would call like a language with God, like a conversation with God in order to, or the universe, in order to kind of, again, be your highest self. And I love how she was like, you're doing this to yourself. Because basically 99.9% of the time, guess what, guys? It's all on you.
And then the other thing that she said too, just at the end of that experience, well, no, she didn't say it. I heard it. It was a voice that I heard at the end as it was all starting to fade away. In other words, there was no love and light. It was just finally coming out of hell. And then I heard this voice say, you don't need drugs to know that part of you.
Yeah.
Drugs to know
the dark side of you.
Like this light. Yeah.
That's what Ram Dass used to tell his story because he was, his story was he got involved with all the, psychedelic acid stuff. And eventually it was like, he used to say like, at some point, for the psychedelic stuff, it will serve a purpose, but at some point you got to like put it aside and like find that within yourself.
Yeah.
It can show you.
You don't need it to know God.
Right. You can show you stuff, but then you can't rely on that all the time. Again, it's like, I was saying this at my class on Sunday evening at AYA. It's like the power is like the Wizard of Oz, where she's like, the power has been within you all along. Mm-hmm. It's always been there. And so you to know God, to know everything about yourself. And in our world, as we're leaving the age of Pisces, has done everything to kind of disconnect that chain where we have to go through someone else. But now that's the freeing part of this new transition is that you are wholly within yourself and you have the capacity to have that understanding and to have all of that. But again, in order to have all that understanding, you got to go through. It's so cheesy, and I kind of like cringe saying this. And Cindy, I know you're gonna know what I'm gonna say in a minute, but we say it in yoga a lot with the lotus flower and how it has to go through the mud.
Yes, no bud, no lotus.
Yeah, it's so cheesy. And I know Todd's probably in the next room rolling his eyes right now. It's so cheesy, but that is a huge thing about why the lotus flower is such an important symbol in yoga, is because you got to go through the mud. Like you can't just go around it. Like as you got to get your hands dirty. You got to have like mascara running down your face as you're crying in a corner sometimes. That's just part of, but I loved how your experience was going to hell and back.
Oh, it was pretty rough. I mean, it was a full pure, I think it was all 6 hours where I have, it's still with me, like a clear understanding of what eternal, because it felt eternal. You know how some people say eternal, hell and damnation? I'm like, okay, got it.
This is what the Baptists
say. I'm done. I'm not doing that anymore. Thank you very much.
You're like, you showed me I'm good. I did a tour. I'm good now. But I loved how the lady said, like, you're doing that to yourself, because even Jesus said that. Even Jesus said, behold, the kingdom of heaven and hell are inside of you.
Yeah, and there was this image, because the feeling at that time was like me just like spiraling. And I couldn't hold on to anything. That was like a general feeling of what was going on when I was on it. Like it was, and there was nothing that I could hold on to. There was nothing that I could hold on to. And I think what I realized afterward is I would look for people to try, like I would like get a vision of my husband or get a vision of my son or get a vision of someone at the yoga studio.
Like pull you out?
And I would like reach out this way for them to grab a hold of, and I would get like a moment of relief, but then it would let go in an instant.
But isn't that such a metaphor?
It's like you gotta pull yourself out.
Yeah, that's such a metaphor, because we always think, we have these safety nets of people in our life, but literally you were born alone and you will leave this earth alone. Like it's all you doing your own work. And yeah, that's awesome. Well, next time, let's talk about the kleshas as people take this in, and then we can talk about all the different kleshas and the different like ego obstacles, because I know it sounds silly, because like Cindy and I, this is what we do in our real lives, but I know that people who are new to this don't even, I try to think back to the beginning. For me, you don't even realize sometimes what certain obstacles are. You don't even realize the projection of obstacles. And so the kleshas kind of help give you that roadmap to kind of understand like what certain things are. So anyway, but guys, so again, I'm going to put the two previous videos that I did with Cindy, I'm going to put down in the description box below again, in case you missed them. So you can go back and rewatch them if you want more information and take notes or whatever you want to do. Again, all of Cindy's contact information is going to be in the description box below, along with all of her social media. Again, her Instagram is very powerful. She does like daily stuff on her Instagram that's really, really powerful. And didn't you just release like a new yoga class on your channel?
Yeah, I just put in a yoga class, and I'm in the process of working a little shorter video too about, because we just had Friday the 13th, like getting more into the mysteries of what
we can talk about that too next too, because there's so much.
Well, Friday the 13th.
Yes.
The ultimate day of the goddess, and
right, and that equal. I know Janine talks a lot about that. Y'all who watch Janine, the goddess energy coming up, and this, and in the missing books of the Bible, y'all see it when we read. What did the Gospel of the Holy 12 say? Jesus didn't call it my father; he called it my father, mother.
Yes.
The duality of both. So that's coming back into our world too. And now guys, so I'm going to, on the community board. So if you go to my homepage and you'll see community you'll see playlist videos, click on the community board. For most of you guys know where that is. I'm going to put Cindy's latest yoga class on the community board. This will be on the playlist, so you can go and practice one of her practices if you would like to. Again, if you go to Sacred Garden's website, that website will be in the description box below. You can see when Cindy is teaching, she still has Zoom classes too. So there's like in-class people that are there in real life, and then virtually as well. And so that's one of the benefits of what's happened over this last year is now students from all over the world can participate in your classes. Because
that's cool. And another thing we have, just if anyone's interested in, we're talking about intuition and developing intuition and the clairs and psychic gifts and connection with the sacred elements and Mother Earth. We have a class coming out. It's called Initiation, where that's what we do. I mean, we help to develop, because, we were talking about when you were saying earlier that sometimes, you're going through this stuff and you feel like there's so much information and sometimes you don't know what to hold on to, or like you're going at it alone. And I mean, you don't have to.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much out there where you don't feel like you have to go through any of this process all by yourself. I mean, that's why all this.
Oh, can you hear me? So sorry, you cut off there. You said that's why all this
exists.
Okay, yeah, I was
like us doing this, all these things.
Yeah.
So you know that you don't have to go through all this process by yourself.
Absolutely. And yeah, so you have a community, guys, and you have Cindy's contact. I'm at Sacred Garden on Sundays. I don't do Zoom though with my class, because my class is a little bit different than the other classes there. But Cindy also has awesome teachers. Literally, her yoga studio is a yoga school. I mean, she has teachers that teach almost every lineage in that one school. So you can find, I know people have been asking me like, oh my God, I didn't know there were all these different schools of yoga. Yeah, there are tons of different schools of yoga. So you have to find one that suits you and what's good for your life. And that could change over time. That could always change. But Cindy's she's more of an Anusara background. I'm an Ashtanga. You've got Iyengar, just your traditional vinyasa flow. That's your contemporary vinyasa flow. You got all the different types of classes there, and all the teachers there are awesome. So you're in good hands at Sacred Garden. And I wish, does the website do you have the gift shop? Like, do you have a store on your website on Sacred Garden?
Oh, yeah, we do have a fun little store at the front.
Yeah, she has a fun store. Maybe I can on Sunday film your store and put it on my community tab.
Tiny, but we have all, like things for your magical endeavors.
Yeah, she's got all different kinds of tarot cards, pendulums, beautiful artwork, all sorts of stuff. So somebody was telling me that like when they come to my, who was it? It was a while ago. When they come to my class, they have to like beeline for the yoga room, because otherwise they'll just spend all their money.
Incenses, all the little things that you need. Yeah,
all the trinkets, and it's so cool. Sometimes I'll come and look through and see what all she's got, because she's got all these really cool things in there. So again, I will put all of her links down below. And thank you for coming on today, Cindy.
Yes, it was fun.
Let's do it next week too. Let's do our whatever, bi-weekly, weekly, whatever is good for you.
It's my pleasure to be on here. I mean, I think part of now it's just sharing it, sharing the ministry. I feel part of it is like a ministry.
Absolutely. And it's so funny.
Mine is more in a brick and mortar place, but I feel that this calling to
put it out there.
More than anything. Yeah.
I was talking to Tamar about this, and I can't remember which person. It was either Scott McKay or Michael Jacob. I think, don't quote me, but they kept commenting on how many women are like in the movement, how many women are coming forward and pushing forward into this new age. And so it is kind of this moment for like that feminine energy to come forward and to help people, and Cindy is the embodiment of that feminine energy, because she's obviously beautiful and very feminine, but she's strong too, and grounded, and knows herself. So you're anybody.
As are you.
Oh, thank you. I feel like I'm still learning things, but
me too, girl.
always. I'm so bought. I'm like everywhere. But we should do that one day too. We should talk about the different doshas, because people have asked me about that, but I've kind of touched on that a little bit. But that would be a fun conversation to have too, about all the different doshas in the future for people. I mean, y'all, there's so much. Like people are like, oh my, I'm overwhelmed. There's so many different boxes to open when it comes to.
Oh my gosh, there is so much information out there.
So much. And we literally just are, in the West especially, are just starting to tap into this. But I promise you, if I can process all the different boxes of goodies, you can too. So anyway, all right, Cindy. Well, I will talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.